The two greatest commandments that Jesus gave was to love God and to love your neighbour. But as a Jehovah's Witness, I was taught that the way that we love our neighbours, people in the community, was to give them a Watchtower magazine or a tract or a leaflet and turn a blind eye, because that's not our problem. Let's talk about it. Hi guys, thanks for joining me here today on this video. So in this video, I'm going to share a little bit more of my experiences growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. I was born into the organisation and I was totally mind controlled, did everything that was asked and believed everything that was taught to us, even though it didn't seem rational, didn't seem correct, and I had a lot of doubts. And I was even a pioneer for several years, and I finally escaped when I was 21. I have done a video about this, and I will drop a link in the description box below, so feel free to check it out. Growing up as Jehovah's Witness, one of the things that even as a child, my earliest memory was going out and knocking doors and doing the preaching work, or the ministry as they call it. And I was out in all weathers, the heat, the rain, the cold, the snow, the ice, all weathers on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And in school holidays, that I was out even more. And here in my local community, just like in all communities across the UK and also I'm sure across the world, there was a lot of problems. There were a lot of homelessness, drug addiction, violence, gangs, abuse, all sorts of problems. The people that we were going out and visiting and knocking the doors, the problems lay with them. They often had those problems, whether they were living in a domestic abusive home or there was violence, drug addiction, financial difficulties, financial hardships, mental health issues, physical health issues. Problems were all around us. As a Jehovah's Witness, I was taught we don't get involved in charity work. That's not for us. We couldn't go and volunteer at Women's Aid or a drug abuse charity. Here in the UK, we have charity shops that support maybe cancer research or charities for young people or heart-related illnesses. We weren't allowed to get involved in any of that. None of that. We were taught that the best way to help people is to go out preaching and to distribute the Watchtower magazines. And it always struck a chord with me, because the story of Jesus and the Good Samaritan was one that was constantly reinforced to me, that Jesus said we've got to love God but also love our neighbour. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan, it's found in the Bible book of Luke, and it tells of a man who was attacked and beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. And a priest came along, ignored him. Then a Levite came along and ignored him. But then a third man came along, and he was a Samaritan. And Samaritans were a much hated group in the community. But this man, knowing that he was of a community that was hated, he put that aside and he helped the man that was beaten and left for dead on the road. And he compassionately helped him. He looked and tended to his wounds. He took him over to an inn so he could get some support and help. And he started to pay for his care. So financially, out of his own means, his own pocket, paid for the care of this man who was beaten. And what he taught was that when somebody is in need, you help them, but you give them what they need. Okay, you give them what they need, and this man needed bandages, he needed his wounds dressing, he needed to be looked after and cared for. And that is a parable that Jesus gave as the standard for us to love our neighbours. But as a Jehovah's Witness, I was taught, no, we don't do that. You do not do that. The best way to help somebody is spiritually. And we do that by going out, preaching to them, offering them a Bible study, and giving them our Watchtower and Tract magazines, even if they are homeless, even if they're living in a doorway, regardless if they're hungry, even if they've been beaten and attacked, if they need to be taken to the hospital, if they need food or water, if whatever the problem is, that's not your problem. That's not our problem as Jehovah's Witnesses. You leave them to the authorities. Our responsibility is to give them spiritual food, as they call it, and give them their literature. And it always bothered me. Always bothered me. And I remember having this conversation with some of the elders and their elders' wives and, some of the maturer ones in the congregation, because we would have charitable events in the local community. It'd be, opportunities to raise funds, whether it be a walk or a run, or, there's a campaign in the UK called Children in Need. There were all of these charitable events, and as a Jehovah's Witness, I wasn't allowed to get involved or contribute any money to them. No. And the only way that I can support is by going out in my community, knocking doors and giving people information and leaflets. And I look back now and I just think it is just shocking. It is disturbing. And just where I live now, there's a shopping centre. It's a small shopping centre, and every day of the week, Jehovah's Witnesses will stand there with their carts, because now, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, we used to go knocking doors. I don't see them coming and knocking doors so much now, but you see them standing on the street corners. I know, not a good look, standing on street corners, peddling their wares. I'm sure there's a name for people who stand on street corners peddling their wares, but we're not going to go there today. But they would stand there on the street corners with their carts. And, I'd often walk past them, or I'm driving past them, and I've never once, in all the years I've seen them stood there, I've never seen them once approach anybody or talk to anybody, but rather they stand and they're on their phones or they're talking amongst themselves. And I've often walked past several times, we get ignored. So it makes me wonder, what are they doing? What are they doing there? But I'm just gone slightly off track. Just where the cart is, there is often 2 homeless men. And these men, they live on the streets. They live in the phone box and in the shop doorways. And they've been there for years. They've been there as long as Jehovah's Witnesses has been there. And I will see people going up to these men, buying them drinks, buying them a sandwich, talking to them. And I've done it myself several times. Because they often ask for money. And I don't tend to give them money because, I don't know how they're going to use that money. Plus, here in the UK, We've got lots of charities that they can go to, or the charities can come out to them and they can support them with whatever they need. So I don't tend to give them money, but what I will do is, and I've done it many a times, is I've gone into the local supermarket and I've bought them sandwiches, I've bought them soups, hot soup, like you can get like a cup of soup. I bought them tea. In the summer I've bought them water. I've gone into the local charity shops, and if I see a blanket or a jacket, like now that it's winter, I bought that and gone and given it to them. Sometimes I've gone and said to them, is there anything you want, anything you need other than money? And they are just so grateful. They're so grateful. They're grateful and thankful that they are seen, but that people in the community walking by and will stop and talk to them and help them. And they often are sitting just feet away from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've never ever seen the Jehovah's Witnesses go up to them, offer them anything. Not a drink, not a sandwich, not a blanket, nothing. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing. And Jehovah's Witnesses teach that, you must love your neighbour. You must love them. But the way that you love them isn't by giving them your money or giving them what they need. You help them by giving them our literature, the Jehovah's Witnesses literature, and you offer them a Bible study. So you haven't got a roof over your head, it's pouring with rain, it's freezing cold, but never mind, here's a watchtower about a paradise earth that's never going to come. Outrageous, absolutely outrageous. Yeah. It's outrageous, absolutely mind-blowing. And I was part of that. I was a part of that for, the first 21, 22 years of my life. And I was mind-controlled and I was conditioned to see that and to think that. And, when I was about 16, I was doing an award that we have here in the UK. It was called the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and you had to get involved in community work. So I started volunteering at the local hospital on Saturdays, and when the elders and some of the more mature ones in the congregation got to hear of it, they were like, why are you doing that? Why are you going and volunteering your time in a hospital when you can volunteer your time to something more valuable and more important, and that's getting out in the preaching work? And I was absolutely guilt-tripped. Absolute guilt-tripped. And being young and being impressionable, and of course being mind-controlled, I gave it up. I gave up my voluntary work in the hospital, and I ended up just going out every Saturday, regardless of what the weather was, in the field ministry for a couple of hours on a Saturday. Yeah, and I can tell you, I didn't enjoy it. It was boring. It was a miserable existence, but it was what I thought I had to do, because that was how they said I was loving my neighbour. So Jehovah's Witnesses, they do not want you to donate. If you're found donating to a charity, that's it. You can be disfellowshipped and lose your friends and your family, and you could be shunned, and nobody will talk to you if you are found supporting a charity. I know. But yet, they're so hypocritical. They are happy for you to donate. They want your money, they want your donations. And in recent years, the governing body, the leadership team of the Jehovah's Witnesses have been double down, insisting that Jehovah's Witnesses donate their money. And there's reasons for it, and it's not for not for this episode here. And maybe I will cover it at another time. But Jehovah's Witnesses are being sued left, right, and centre for millions, because of the abuse that a lot of the younger people experienced and suffered by criminals that are harboured in the congregation. And when young people complained of the abuse, they're not encouraged to go to the police, and if they do go to the police, they can be disfellowshipped and shunned. So they're silenced, and the perpetrator, the criminals, either they deny it because of this ridiculous 2-witness rule. So they're saying that you need 2 witnesses to a crime. Well, if somebody's been abused, you're never going to have 2 witnesses. And if the perpetrator denies it, it goes nowhere. And if the perpetrator admits it, i.e., there's like a young girl becomes pregnant, for example, that is evidence, and he admits it. From he admits it, it's seen as he's repented, and therefore your sins are forgiven. And so because there is this massive cover-up on another scale, Jehovah's Witnesses are being taken to court by the victims, sometimes many years later, when they've left the religion and they are coming to terms of what's happened to them. So they're bringing legal cases, and this isn't just in America or in the UK, it's all over the world. So they are strapped for cash. So they are doubling down, asking for money, asking people to leave their homes and businesses to them in their will. It's honestly, I don't want to go too deep in it today because this is about the Good Samaritan, but maybe it's a topic for another time. But they're doubling down, asking for money. They're selling off kingdom halls all around the world, and that is money that the local community has donated to build these kingdom halls or these churches, and now the leadership is selling off these buildings, getting the money to go into their coffers, one, to pay off these claims, these legal claims, but also they're into real estate and they're building these resort-like developments in upstate New York. So they don't want the local Jehovah's Witnesses on the ground donating money or time to local charities around heart disease, cancer, children, mental health, domestic violence, families, a stroke. They don't want you doing that. And if they find you doing that, you can be shunned. You can be disfellowshipped. They don't want you doing that. But yet they want you to donate. They want the Jehovah's Witnesses to donate all their funds to the organisation. I know. And then they look for governmental schemes and they access those schemes. So in some countries, they will say that they are clergy and therefore get clergy privileges and evade opportunities or the need rather to pay taxes because they're now clergy in certain countries, and in other countries they're not clergy. But also, if there's any government funding available, they will shape who they are and what they are to be able to access that funding. It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing, the depths that they will go to. But yet, for the homeless man on the street who has got no clothes, hasn't eaten for 3 days, is living in a doorway, not our problem. Not our problem. Here you go. Here's a leaflet. Here's a book. We'll give you a Bible study. And that's as much charity as they'll do. They say that they get involved in disaster relief, and this makes me laugh. And I once had this conversation, I had this conversation many times before I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, because I could not understand how or why, if there was a disaster, say there was an earthquake, Jehovah's Witnesses would be proudly boasting that they get involved in charity work and disaster relief. Looks good, yeah? Oh no. Their charity relief, their disaster relief, only extended to rebuilding any kingdom halls that were damaged. So if the roof blew off, their disaster relief fund would kick in. I say fund, it wasn't even a fund, their disaster relief programme would kick in. But this wasn't organised by the head office. No, this was organised by the local community. And they would be raising funds to get the roof repaired. But if a local Jehovah's Witness had lost the roof on their house, oh no, that's your problem. Go and claim on your insurance. Claim on your insurance. But they weren't there to help them. And if they were, it would just be friends of that particular family that would help. It wasn't organised by the congregation, and certainly not by, the head office. Oh no, that's your problem. But if the Kingdom Hall lost this roof, yeah, you've got to donate. And we've got to get this done. Why? Because the property is of value. The property is of value, not the people, but the property. And also in the local community, Jehovah's Witnesses, if they were going to help anybody, would only help other Jehovah's Witnesses. They wouldn't say, there's a woman down the road and, she's an elderly woman on her own and her roof is blown off. No, that's not our problem. No, it's nothing to do with us. Ain't interested. If she's Seventh-day Adventist, a Catholic, a Protestant, it's definitely not our problem. Not helping. I could not get my head around it. And I used to always say, when I used to say these things, I had to always be careful, because I knew that if I spoke too much or too loud or too hard, it could end up with me being disfellowshipped, being shunned and being removed as a pioneer. So I had to be really careful what I said and who I said it to, which is an awful way to live. But that was something that I always thought was wrong. Always thought was really, really wrong. Is that they would not, as a community, as a congregation, as an organisation, they would not support somebody in need. Yeah, they would not. The local congregation wouldn't go, oh, there's Joe Bloggs who lives next door to the Kingdom Hall and they need some help. Let's organise a relief effort. No, that's down to, the authorities. It's down to the government. If it was a Jehovah's Witness who lives the other side and they lost their roof, claim on your insurance, and if you've got friends, they would help. They might bring you some food, or, they may help you clean up and stuff. But if it was the Kingdom Hall, the property, because that is seen as valuable, then everybody is expected to get involved. So that is the extent of their charity, the extent of their disaster relief, and it always bothered me. And even in disaster zones, you'd still see the Jehovah's Witnesses out preaching, because in their eyes, that's the best way to support the community. Not by helping with rescue efforts or recovery efforts or clean-up efforts or rebuilding efforts. No, the best way to help is by standing back, letting the authorities, letting the community do their thing. We're doing our thing, and we're preaching to people about a paradise earth that is just a fantasy. So love your neighbour. Love your neighbour. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses taught. That is what Jesus said. Jesus said, love God and love your neighbour. Those are the two commandments, the two golden rules. And Jehovah's Witnesses, their example of loving your neighbour is by standing back and turning a blind eye, and where the opportunity presents, giving out a leaflet and offering a Bible study. So that was my extent of charity work with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm mentioning this today because I've not long come back from my high street, and I've seen the Jehovah's Witnesses stood there with their carts, and just a couple of feet away are these two homeless men wrapped up in a duvet in the phone box. It's quite cold out here today. Wrapped up in the phone box, in a duvet. I don't know whether they're brothers or friends. I have spoken to them, and as I've said, I've given them food, gone and bought food for them many occasions. But yeah, I've just seen Jehovah's Witnesses just stood there by their cart on their phone, yapping to each other, and these two homeless men are there. Now, I say that I don't know if they've approached them. I don't know if they've asked them anything. I don't know if they've directed them to homeless shelters or anything like that. I don't know. But my experience of being a Jehovah's Witness and their stance and their philosophy towards community support, I doubt it very, very, very much that anybody would have approached these people. And you would have, they tend to do it like on a rota basis. They would have the stand, and you would have a couple of, usually about 3 or 4 Jehovah's Witnesses stood there, and they just stand there talking to each other or just gazing out into the street. And I'm like, why? But that's a topic for another time. But they would, so the Jehovah's Witnesses, so they would have a couple of people on, and then I'd often see another couple of people come in, and they would do a handover, and then they would go. And I was like, I know when I was a Jehovah's Witness and going and knocking doors, it was, I never converted anyone, never. And I was knocking doors for 21 years. I never converted anybody. I did have a Bible study, and that was only because there was somebody in the congregation and they wanted their children to have Bible studies. And because I was a pioneer, they asked me to do the studies. So I had a couple of Bible studies, but for all the time that I was going out knocking doors, having that one-on-one conversation with people, never converted anybody. I did manage to get one girl along to the hall, and she came along for a couple of times, and then that was it. But other than that, no. So the chances of people, Jehovah's Witnesses, standing passively on the street corner, chances of them converting anybody is even lower. So, anybody watching, any Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, I'd say, do you know what? Don't waste your time for the Watchtower stood on a street corner. Not a good look. Get off the street corner and go into your local charity shop. Contact your local homeless shelter, mental health charity, your local hospital, your local school, and go and do some real charity work and support your community. That's what I'd say. Guys, that's it from me today. Thank you. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much for being here. So guys, if you're watching at this point, thank you so much for being here. I do have some plans for 2026 because I'm on a journey to exploring my faith and trying to find Jesus. After leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, I wanted nothing to do with religion, Christianity, with God, with Jesus. And I was so confused. But I look at people with a faith, a Christian faith, and the way that they love Jesus and they celebrate him and they hail him, and sometimes I'm really envious of that. So I'm on this journey in 2026 to exploring faith and trying to find and discover Jesus. I don't know what I'm going to find. I don't know whether I'm going to end up a believer. I don't know. But that's the journey that I'm going to be on. And I'd love for you to come with me and to share your thoughts, and to support me. And let's support each other on this journey. Now, I do have another channel. I will drop a link below. It was my ExJW channel. And I am thinking about resurrecting that. I'm not sure whether I will yet. But if I do, I will let you know. But for now, I am going to put all of this ExJW content in a separate playlist on my channel. Because my channel, Time Out with Angela, is all about lifestyle for people 40 and 50 plus, weight loss, clothing hauls, shopping hauls, travel, all of that. So it's adding the Jehovah's Witness content in kind of like convolutes it a little bit. So I'm putting it there for now, but I am thinking about resurrecting my ExJW channel. So if I do, I will let you know. But for now, thank you so much for being here with me, and whatever you do, have a wonderful day, and I will speak to you very soon. Take care now. Bye.